Tian Shengdong having 7 for his strength surprised Zhou Wen slightly. The strength measuring device's value was slightly different from the strength stat in the game on the phone. However, the difference wasn't that much. They could basically be considered as sharing the same unit. Before Zhou Wen received the mysterious phone, his strength was only a 7 as well. It's your turn. Tian Shengdong took a step to the side and said to Zhou Wen. Zhou Wen stood in front of the strength measuring device as the trio's eyes landed on him. All of them wanted to know how much strength this former number 1 genius of Guide High School had left. Inside the primordial energy module, Yu Qubei shared the same sentiments. After spending more than a month as a wastrel, how much more strength did Zhou Wen have? Although strength wasn't something that declined as quickly as one's reaction in combat, having it was one thing and delivering it was another. Skills to deliver strength required plenty of practice before one could perfectly release one's strength. Over time, one would get rusty, therefore even if one still had strength, they could hardly release it completely. Zhou Wen stood in front of the pressure board, taking on a pose to deliver an inch punch. It wasn't a primordial energy skill but an ordinary combat skill. It was part of the school's normal teachings. However, inch punch was easy to pick up but difficult to master. It was used to deliver the greatest amount of strength at the shortest distance and was one that needed plenty of practice to achieve a certain level of mastery. Furthermore, it was delivered at short distances, so inch punch didn't have any beautiful or cool poses. The typical student was more willing to practice something that showed its effects quickly and punching techniques that appeared domineering. Of course, even more students chose to train in weapons. After all, the damage from weapons in actual combat was far greater than one's limbs. Upon seeing Zhou Wen nearly plaster his fist to the pressure board, Fang Ruoxi and company realized that he was using inch punch. Tian Shengdong curled his lips and said, the explosive strength delivered by inch punch is very strong indeed, but it's not something easily mastered without years of strenuous training. Let's hope Zhou Wen doesn't end up overshooting his mark. Although Tian Shengdong's words weren't pleasant, Yu Qubei agreed. Inch punch wasn't easily mastered. Zhou Wen didn't seem to practice much and in the recent month, he had engrossed himself in gaming. Therefore, to use inch punch for a strength test might end up giving him worse results. Bang! As the quartet was still in thought, they saw Zhou Wen's fist tremble at an extremely fast speed. It was so fast that they might have imagined themselves seeing things if not for the explosive bang from the pressure board. It was as though Zhou Wen's fist had never moved. Their 8 eyes quickly looked towards the screen. They wished to know the results of Zhou Wen's punch. The gap's too tiny. The same thought came to the minds of Tian Shengdong, Fang Ruoxi, and Li Zi simultaneously. The distance he threw his punch from was too tiny. Although inch punch is about delivering the most amount of strength with the shortest distance, it's very difficult to deliver any strength when the gap is too tiny, just like a person can jump higher when squatting down or retracting an arm to deliver a more powerful punch. Inch punch goes the whole way. Only true inch punch experts can deliver that much strength at such short distances. Yu Qubei had a lot more going on in his mind. When all of them saw the number on the screen, their eyes widened immediately. They saw one number after another light up, and soon 10 was lit up. Zhou Wen's inch punch had delivered 10 points of strength. 10. It's a 10. How is this possible? Yu Qubei was pleasantly surprised. Yu Qubei had been teaching for years. The thought of a high school student delivering a punch with a strength of 10 without using any primordial energy skills was terrifying. Even if the typical student had strength crystals to use, it was very difficult for them to reach such levels during high school. This was because typical strength crystals were limited when it came to enhancing one's strength. Beyond 7, using a typical strength crystal was practically useless. One couldn't have their strength improve unless one had extremely high-quality strength crystals, otherwise they could only cultivate a primordial energy art to constantly hone their bodies to slowly grow their strength. But that was just too difficult. Before evolving to the legendary stage, it was very difficult for the typical human to have strength reaching a value of 10. Most humans were at 7 to 8 at the mortal stage. Zhou Wen was clearly still in the mortal stage, yet he could deliver strength valued at 10 with just his muscles alone. This was considered extremely rare even in the entire league. It was probably not an exaggeration to call it 1 in a million. Could it be that Zhou Wen didn't wallow in his self-misery? The reason he's constantly sleeping in class is because of the fatigue from training himself even more excessively. The more Yu Qubei thought about it, the more he was convinced of his theory. The look he gave Zhou Wen was mixed with approbation and cherishing as well as relief. It has to be the case. The former principal knows better indeed. I had mistaken him. To have 10 strength at the mortal stage is not something anyone in Guide City can match. Even among all the high school students on Earth, he will still be top class. What a good child. It must have been hard on him. The more Yu Qubei thought about it, the more fondness he felt for Zhou Wen. He felt that not only was Zhou Wen talented, but the latter also had a good temperament. Ever since he was defeated by Jing, many people had been wagging their tongues at him. Under such immense pressure, he hadn't tried to defend himself but had actually managed to cultivate such an impressive step in a short period of time. Such a state of mind and talent was very rare among high school students. No way. Delivering 10 without using any primordial energy skills. Don't tell me this fellow is hiding at home daily and honing his strength. Tian Shengdong couldn't help but gulp. To deliver 10 strength at the mortal stage was just too shocking. It was rare for a tiny city like Guide City to produce such a person. Li Zi and Fang Ruoxi looked at Zhou Wen with odd looks. Although Fang Ruoxi never believed Zhou Wen to be someone who would wallow in self-misery and that he had trained arduously in private, she had never expected him to attain such progress. From the looks of it, the numbers from the strength measuring device are a little different from the game. In-game, my strength is 9, but in the real world, it's 10. Zhou Wen thought to himself. To be able to deliver 10 strength, you do live up to your reputation as the #1 genius of Guide High School. However, if you believe that you have defeated me, you're wrong, Tian Xingdong said as he looked at Zhou Wen. Upon seeing Zhou Wen's result, Tian Xingdong was already willing to let the former join their team. Although Tian Xingdong could deliver more than 10 strength with Lightning Fist, it was something that expended primordial energy. At this present level, he could only deliver one punch in a short period of time, preventing him from using it for long. As for Zhou Wen, he had delivered 10 strength. He could engage in combat for long periods of time, a huge boon to the team. It was even more useful than Tian Xingdong's Lightning Fist. Another reason was Zhou Wen's Inch Punch. To be able to use that, it was obvious that Zhou Wen hadn't given up on himself. He must have been secretly cultivating and hadn't suffered from being rusty with his skills. However, Tian Xingdong wasn't willing to admit defeat. He still planned on defeating Zhou Wen before magnanimously voicing out his acceptance of Zhou Wen into the team. Article 7 of 1597. Xingdong, Li Zi was just about to say something when Tian Xingdong waved his hand to cut him off. The benefits were obvious if a person with strength 10 could join their team. Li Zi believed that since Zhou Wen had shown enough of his prowess, there was no need to continue. Making things ugly was not beneficial to any party. If Tian Xingdong were to use Lightning Fist to defeat Zhou Wen, thus causing him to leave, it would be a loss for them. Upon seeing Tian Xingdong walk to the pressure board, Li Zi had wanted to say this but was stopped by Fang Ruoxi. Is this really fine? Li Zi looked at Fang Ruoxi and said. It's fine. That fellow has already accepted Zhou Wen. He just doesn't want to lose, Fang Ruoxi said softly. Li Zi was slightly taken aback before he was enlightened. He cursed in amusement before falling silent. That fellow just can't bear to play second fiddle. Tian Xingdong began the second round of strength tests. Tian Xingdong's expression was heavy as he stood in front of the pressure board. He slowly lifted his fist as veins protruded from it. Lightning bolts seemed to mesh together, making it look ferocious and terrifying. Bang! The fist slammed heavily into the pressure board. The special metal alloy pressure board jerked back obviously as the numbers on the screen rapidly lit up, eventually stopping at 11. How's that? As he reeled from expending all his primordial energy, Tian Xingdong secretly wiped sweat from his brow. His strength was only a 7. And with a rank 1 lightning fist, it could raise his strength by about half. It wasn't extremely stable, allowing him to dish out 10 or 11 randomly. He had done pretty well today, allowing him to defeat Zhou Wen. That's impressive. Zhou Wen was indeed a genius when it came to cultivation. However, he wasn't a sensitive person. He didn't notice Tian Xingdong's emotional changes and was caught up with the notion that he couldn't join the team unless he defeated Tian Xingdong. Therefore, he walked towards the strength measuring device again. However, Zhou Wen didn't immediately throw out his punch. Instead, he began studying the strength measuring device. What are you looking at? Just tell us if you can't do it. It's not embarrassing losing to me. Realizing that Zhou Wen wasn't delivering the punch, Tian Xingdong was imagining that Zhou Wen lacked the confidence and was hesitant about delivering the punch. Zhou Wen looked at the strength measuring device and asked worriedly, the school won't ask me to pay for it if I break it, right? The moment Tian Xingdong heard Zhou Wen, he burst out in exasperated laughter. Bro, nice bragging. This is a strength measuring device. It's specially made for strength measuring. Although it's only a low-end model meant for high schoolers with an upper limit of 20, few high schoolers can hit the limit, much less destroy it. Let's do this. If you really destroy it, I'll pay for the damages. Makes sense. Zhou Wen nodded. The device did seem rather solid, so it was unlikely it be damaged. Zhou Wen didn't hesitate further as he raised his fist. The skin on his fist gradually turned red with a metallic sheen. It looked like it was wrapped in a red metallic membrane. Primordial energy skill. So Zhou Wen has already learned a primordial energy skill. Tian Xingdong was instantly somewhat disappointed. Without a doubt, with Zhou Wen's strength, the knowledge of a primordial energy skill, no matter how weak it was, could dish out strength that was far greater than Tian Xingdong's. Therefore, the latter knew that his loss was a certainty. Fang Ruoxi and Li Zi were somewhat surprised that Zhou Wen knew a primordial energy skill. It enabled them to earn higher points at the combat test. Bang! Zhou Wen slammed his fist heavily into the pressure board and as though it was hit by a sledgehammer, it jerked back. The numbers on the screen kept lighting up, instantly surpassing 11. I wonder what his final score will be through the use of a primordial energy skill, /M Fang Ruoxi thought, but she saw the numbers lighting up at a blisteringly fast rate. In a blink of an eye, all of the numbers were lit up as her expression changed. Boom. Before the spectators could have any thoughts, the strength measuring device produced a strange sound. At some spot, the back of the device cracked as pale yellow liquid spewed out like a fountain. Tian Xingdong and company widened their mouths into an O shape as they stared blankly at Zhou Wen and the liquid-spewing strength measuring device. There was silence. Yu Qubai's eyes widened as well, eager to rush forward to personally determine if the strength measuring device was really broken. He naturally wasn't wanting payment from Zhou Wen, but that he was filled with disbelief that a high schooler's primordial energy skill could be this strong. Tian Xingdong trembled. At the thought of the punch's might, he couldn't bring himself to imagine what would have happened if he had battled Zhou Wen in a strength test. The upper limit of the strength measuring device was 20, but it didn't mean that it could only withstand strength 20. In fact, to burst the hydraulic mechanism needed strength that far exceeded 20. Even with strength 10, Zhou Wen probably needed a primordial energy skill at rank 8 or 9 to deliver such damage. If he hadn't learned of Zhou Wen's background from the former principal, he would even have suspected that Zhou Wen had used high-level primordial energy skill crystals, otherwise it would have been impossible for him to possess such strength. However, with Zhou Wen's background, it seemed impossible for him to possess such high-level primordial energy skill crystals. If he had truly mastered a primordial energy skill to such a level by himself, that's way too terrifying. Yu Qubei couldn't help but recall the former principal's evaluation of Zhou Wen, and there are two geniuses in the world. /M. One type of genius is called Zhou Wen, the other type are the other geniuses. You said that you'd be paying if it's damaged. You're a man of his word, right? Zhou Wen was taken aback as he looked at Tian Xingdong. He hadn't expected Vigor Divine Fist to really be vigorous enough to destroy the strength measuring device. He was poor and really didn't have the money to compensate the school if it really pressed him for damages. Yes, I'll pay for it. Bro, any problem that can be solved with money isn't a problem. We are old classmates and a team. Leave this to me, Tian Xingdong said with a beaming smile as he came round. Tian Xingdong came from a rich family and could easily afford it. However, a second teammate like Zhou Wen was probably impossible to find in a small city like Guide City. With Zhou Wen joining the team, Tian Xingdong believed that perhaps they weren't only able to obtain first at the combat test in Guide City but that they could even raise their targets. Li Zi and Fang Ruoxi were in a good mood as well. Having a powerful teammate like Zhou Wen join the team brought them one step closer to their goals. This fellow is more interesting than I imagined. Fang Ruoxi narrowed her eyes as she looked at Zhou Wen. With Zhou Wen officially joining the team, the four submitted an application form for the combat test. Many of the teachers and heads in the school were rather surprised to see Zhou Wen's name on the list. The teachers of Fang Ruoxi, Li Zi and Tian Xingdong had even spoken to them privately, openly and covertly trying to get them to select another teammate. They didn't want Zhou Wen to be a burden on them. However, the trio refused, adamant about having Zhou Wen in their team. It left their teachers vexed. Only Yu Qubei drank his tea calmly. He knew very well that Zhou Wen was the strongest among the four. Just wait and see. After the test, we will know who's the burden. Yu Qubei drank his tea as he thought. Zhou Wen was his student, so he was naturally displeased that the other teachers spoke ill of him behind Zhou Wen's back. Article 8 of 1597. Zhou Wen didn't think too much about it. The thoughts of others had nothing to do with him. All he wanted was to score well at the combat test during the college entrance exams. From that, he could enter a reputable school before focusing on gaming. After cruising through college and graduating, he could then get a job related to the dimensional zones. However, there was one thing that Zhou Wen took notice of. Fang Ruoxi's mention of his defeat under Jing's hands had made him realize something was amiss. It was something he hadn't thought too deeply about previously. Jing was about his age and was perhaps a little younger, yet she was very likely already a legendary stage expert. Although they were just separated by one stage, it was a night and day difference between the mortal and legendary stages. It was almost impossible for someone at the mortal stage to defeat a legendary stage expert. The clearest indicator of a legendary stage expert was the opportunity to obtain a companion beast. And at the mortal stage, it was very difficult to obtain companion beasts. Even if one did get a companion egg, they lacked the primordial energy to carry out the incubation. There were also many opaque differences. For example, after a human advanced to the legendary stage, they would awaken their legendary life providence, greatly augmenting their constitutions. It also widened the gap between mortal stage and legendary stage. Unless there was any reason that prompted action, the typical legendary stage expert found it beneath them to attack people at the mortal stage. For Jing to challenge him, a student at the mortal stage, and then transfer out of the school shortly after the challenge, it appeared as though she had specially come to beat him up. I've never left Guide City all my life. How could I have offended someone like her? Could it be Dad? As Zhou Wen thought about it, he came up with one possibility. Zhou Wen's mother had passed away during childbirth, causing him to be brought up in a single-parent family. As for his dad, he was an unreliable man. Zhou Wen's father was named Zhou Lingfeng. Like the word feng symbolizing wind in his name, he was like a gust of wind. From the age of 5, Zhou Wen learned to be independent. He had to do simple cooking, laundry, and the management of household matters, as well as do groceries. And in the words of his unreliable dad, this was to nurture his survivability as a man. It would also be the foundation on which he would use to get a wife. Although his dad was very lazy, there was something that left Zhou Lingfeng slightly relieved. Zhou Lingfeng had never missed out on paying his living expenses. As a polyglot, Zhou Lingfeng did translation work. When Zhou Wen was young, his father often translated documents from home. However, with the improvement in technology, translation software became much better and Zhou Lingfeng's work reduced as a result. When Zhou Wen grew a little older, he became more independent, so Zhou Lingfeng took on interpretation work. He often went out of town for a week or even as long as a few months. The latest instance was more ridiculous. Zhou Wen hadn't seen his father in half a year. If it wasn't for his monthly living expenses being transferred into his account, he would have been worried his father had died. This was because Zhou Lingfeng often went to relatively remote places. The reception conditions there were often terrible, so it was common for him to be uncontactable. Zhou Wen was used to it. Even if he wasn't used to it, it wasn't as though he could do anything about it other than waiting for Zhou Lingfeng's return. Their home was made up of two men. Zhou Wen had no chance to offend a figure like Jing, so he was highly suspicious that his dad had offended her. Failing to find him, all she could do was to vent her anger on his son. Zhou Wen had zero confidence in his dad. He was the kind of person that indulged in pleasures. He was also someone who often spent time at bars. He had often hit on chicks in the past, only to be beaten up by the woman's male partner. Luckily Zhou Wen was able to fend for himself. If not, he wondered if Zhou Lingfeng would even have had the ability to raise him. As he thought about it, his phone suddenly rang. With his mind wandering, Zhou Wen jumped. After taking out his ordinary phone, he realized it was from his father, Zhou Lingfeng. Speak of the devil. Zhou Wen hurriedly picked up the call. Just as he was about to say something, he heard Zhou Lingfeng's voice, "Son, I'm getting married. Will you be coming to my wedding?" Thankfully, Zhou Wen wasn't drinking any water, otherwise he would have spewed it all out. You're getting married. To who? Zhou Wen wasn't against Zhou Lingfeng getting married. After all, he had been single for so many years, so it was very normal for him to find a partner. Besides, he might become more reliable after his marriage, so it could be a blessing in disguise. I'll send Sweetie's photo to you, Zhou Lingfeng said. Before Zhou Wen said a word, the phone hung up and a photo was sent. Zhou Wen glanced at the photo and saw Zhou Lingfeng with a young woman. The woman looked to be in her 30s at most. She was elegant and beautiful, and she had a rather good presence. She looked different from the so-called beauties on the internet. This lady had a sensual aesthetic and a unique presence that could hardly be described with words. How's it? Your new mom isn't too bad, right? Her name is Ouyang Lan, Zhou Lingfeng called again and said smugly. Not bad, but she's not my mom, Zhou Wen said. Although he didn't mind Zhou Lingfeng getting remarried, he didn't plan on acknowledging a new mother at his age. After all, Zhou Lingfeng wasn't home most of the time and he was already accustomed to living alone. It was also not necessary that the lady would like baggage like him, so it would be quite nice if they led their own separate lives. My wife is naturally your mom. That's an undeniable fact. By the way, my wedding is in a few days. You have to come, all right? Zhou Lingfeng said indifferently, as though he took nothing to heart. Where is it? When is it? Zhou Wen asked. Luang. In a week, Zhou Lingfeng said. I'll be taking the college entrance exams in a few days. The period you mentioned happens to clash with the combat test which I plan on participating in. I won't be able to go even if I wanted, Zhou Wen said helplessly. He was willing to participate in the wedding, but he really couldn't go. Wow, time passes so quickly. You are already having your college entrance exams. Zhou Lingfeng clearly didn't remember this as he made a poignant comment. Zhou Wen didn't expect his father to know it, but he was still somewhat disappointed hearing him say that. Perhaps Zhou Lingfeng had even forgotten that he was graduating from high school this year. Dad, do you know that metal biscuit tin inside our wardrobe? Zhou Wen suddenly asked. Biscuit tin? What biscuit tin? Zhou Lingfeng asked in puzzlement. The one that's about 30 centimeters long. It's a biscuit tin that's squarish and made of metal. It has a picture of a cartoon bear. Zhou Wen described the biscuit tin's characteristics in detail. Oh, that bear biscuit tin. I often ate from it when I was little. However, that brand of biscuits isn't sold anymore. The one we have at home was probably left behind. Why are you asking about it? Inside that bear biscuit tin is a cell phone. Did you put it in? Zhou Wen's heart raced slightly. That cell phone was the mysterious phone he was using. Article 9 of 1597. Cell phone. Zhou Lingfeng was somewhat puzzled. Only after quite some time did he suddenly say, is the phone you're talking about one with a completely white metal case and a black screen without any buttons? About 5 to 6 inches big. That's right. Is that phone yours? Zhou Wen asked in surprise. No, it's your grandfather's. I'd have already forgotten about it if you hadn't mentioned it, Zhou Lingfeng said with a laugh. That phone was your grandfather's baby. Grandfather's baby? Where he did get it from? Zhou Wen seemed to notice something amiss with Zhou Lingfeng's tone as he pressed on. Zhou Lingfeng recounted the phone's origins, leaving Zhou Wen quite surprised. Zhou Wen's grandfather was a carpenter years ago, however, he wasn't a carpenter who made tables or chairs. He could do those, but his focus was on building wooden buildings that mimicked ancient structures. In the past, when Guide Ancient City was being rebuilt, they needed to preserve the ancient city's former state, so the construction of many wooden buildings in the ancient style was needed. Zhou Wen's father had taken the job and spent more than a year in the city. During this period, an ancient dried well was excavated from the ancient city's site. It was the graveyard shift, so there weren't any outsiders around. Only Zhou Wen's grandfather and a few workers were present. When the ancient well was dug out, there was a glow that emitted from below. Imagining that they had dug out treasure, the workers came to an agreement and headed down to dig for it, hoping to strike it rich. After they went down the well, they discovered an ancient rotting wooden case. The case had almost disintegrated, and there were many holes in it. It was from these holes that the light shone out. The few workers brought the case up, imagining that there was some treasure in it. With just a few of them, they could split it and end up living in the lap of luxury for the rest of their lives. To their surprise, it was a cell phone. Although cell phones had just become widespread back then, it was no longer anything rare. Furthermore, the phone was still lit in the beginning. After they took it out, the screen went black as though it had lost power. There weren't any buttons on the phone, nor was there any charging port. Zhou Wen's grandfather and company were greatly disappointed, imagining that it was a prank. Since it looked broken without any value, everyone lost interest in it. Eventually, Zhou Wen's grandfather threw it into a tool bag. Later, it was brought back home. Zhou Wen's grandfather didn't throw it away and kept it in the storeroom. When Zhou Lingfeng was young, Zhou Wen's grandfather had even told him the story. However, it was recounted like a horror story, thus leaving quite a deep impression on Zhou Lingfeng. That crappy phone can't even be turned on. When I was young, I took it to a phone repair shop, hoping to sell it for a few packets of cigarettes, but the boss said it was worthless. So I just threw it into the biscuit tin. Don't tell me you plan on selling it for money. Cell phones have such a short lifespan and they aren't considered antiques. Old models aren't worth anything, Zhou Lingfeng said. Zhou Wen thought to himself, thankfully you didn't manage to swap the phone for cigarettes, otherwise me crying would be an understatement. The phone has never lit up before. Zhou Wen asked further. How could it? It's been sitting there for years. Ignoring the fact that it's broken, even if it isn't, it would have long run out of charge. Zhou Lingfeng cut off Zhou Wen and said, all right. I have many things to tend to over here. Since I've already informed you, it's up to you to come to the wedding. With that said, Zhou Lingfeng hung up. Something dug up from Guide Ancient City. Unfortunately, that place has already become a dimensional zone. Ordinary people have no way of going close. However, Guide City's combat test is inside Guide Ancient City. I wonder where that ancient well is, or if I have a chance of heading over to take a look. Zhou Wen thought about it but was without any clues. Just as Zhou Lingfeng had said, phones were something that were made in the last few decades. It was impossible for them to be antiques. Even if they were antiques, they couldn't possess any mystical power. Damn it. I forgot to ask Dad if he had offended anyone. Zhou Wen was planning on calling again, but after some thought he decided against it. Since In Jing was gone and hadn't really done anything to him, there was no point in raising it now the matter was already over. Taking out the mysterious phone, he opened the Ant Nest app and once again started his grinding. The ants were killed by the blood-colored avatar as his in-game character behaved like him. Zhou Wen received all the experiences and lessons learned from combat. Now, Zhou Wen was getting more experienced at killing vigor ants. He lasted much longer and could now kill 400 to 500 vigor ants with just one life. In the past, he would usually succumb after killing about 100. Unfortunately, his luck today was nothing to speak of. 2 strength crystals and a constitution crystal dropped. Furthermore, they were low in value and could only be used for energy replenishment. He wasn't able to upgrade himself directly with them. As he was getting pumped from the killing, he suddenly saw a red mutated vigor ant appear. Delighted, he controlled the blood-colored avatar to rush over. Before he had mastered Vigor Divine Fist, killing mutated vigor ants was somewhat difficult, but this time he delivered one Vigor Divine Fist immediately, blasting its head apart. Following that, he threw out another punch to blast its body apart. Ding! A crisp sound was heard as a dimensional crystal dropped. Unfortunately, there was only one. Killed mutated vigor ant. Discovered constitution crystal. Zhou Wen took a careful look and saw that it had a value of 9, delighting him. His constitution was at 8, and with this constitution crystal he could improve once again. Constitution involved a person's resilience and endurance. Only with high constitution could someone fight prolonged battles without becoming exhausted. One would also be able to better withstand blows. The ascetic meditation he cultivated in mainly strengthened his constitution and strength. Picking up the constitution crystal with the blood-colored avatar, a strange force was transmitted from the phone, instantly spreading across Zhou Wen's body. It made every cell in him seem to come to life. As he watched his in-game constitution change to 9, Zhou Wen felt his body become significantly tougher. When ordinary vigor ants bit at his blood-colored avatar, the amount of health he lost was much less. Zhou Wen continued grinding and discovered that such mutant vigor ants occasionally appeared in the nest, but its spawning spot was random. Furthermore, they didn't always drop dimensional crystals. Later, Zhou Wen encountered 2 mutated vigor ants again, but nothing dropped. Time quickly passed amidst his grinding. Nothing changed. He slept through his classes and gamed after classes. Only during cultivation classes did he hone his teamwork with Fang Ruoxi and company. However, over the past few days, Zhou Wen often felt that Yu Qiubei looked at him strangely. The latter was often smiling at him with narrowed eyes, creeping him out. Article 10 of 1597. Tian Xingdong was training his fist techniques on the field, but from time to time he would sneak a glance at Zhou Wen, who was under a tree. He had been training for nearly an hour while Zhou Wen had spent the same amount of time gaming on the phone. It's really exasperating to compare. We spend so much effort training, but that fellow just games. Tian Xingdong felt more depressed the more he looked. After the past few days of training, Tian Xingdong had learned something. The reason Zhou Wen was considered the best genius in Guide High School wasn't solely because of his cultivation talent. Tian Xingdong had originally thought that cultivation akin to sailing against a current was suitable for all humans since humans weren't machines. It was very easy to regress if one didn't train daily. It was especially so when putting theory into practice in actual combat. Some level of deviation would affect the timing of opportunities and distance placement. But Zhou Wen was different. As long as he learned something, regardless of whether he trained or not, he appeared very skilled and natural when actually putting it to practice. Over the past few days, Zhou Wen would join them when the quartet trained together. But when it was time for individual training, Zhou Wen would run to the side to game. If it wasn't because Zhou Wen's performance was impeccable when cooperating with the rest and, in fact, was the most outstanding one among the four, Tian Xingdong might have taken on a teacher's responsibility to teach the former a good lesson, inculcating in him the importance of daily practice and improvement. But now, all Tian Xingdong could do was sneak glances at Zhou Wen sitting there gaming while he had to engage in strenuous training. Where are you looking at? Focus. Your actions aren't right, Li Zi said as he walked over. Tian Xingdong glanced at Zhou Wen, who was just gaming, and said in envy, how nice it would be if I had talent like Zhou Wen. Cultivation is so miserable. Who doesn't want to just game daily? Li Zi said with a laugh, do you think Zhou Wen is really just gaming all day? Isn't that so? He has so much fun gaming daily. It's obvious for us all to see, Tian Xingdong said. Li Zi shook his head and said, we can only see him when he's in school. We have no idea what he does after school. Are you telling me that he's cultivating hard at home after school? Tian Xingdong understood what Li Zi was getting at. There's no free lunch in the world. A person like Zhou Wen might appear harmless as though he cares about nothing, but deep down in his bones, he's extremely prideful. He suffered such a terrible defeat under In Jing's hands, and although there might be extenuating circumstances for his defeat with his character, he probably couldn't accept it. He must have worked very hard at cultivation. This can be seen from how adept he is in actual combat. He's definitely just putting on a farce that he's decadent and engrossed in gaming, Li Zi said with a severe countenance. Then why does he act so decadent in school? There's no need for him to do so. Isn't it better to spend time gaming than on cultivation? Tian Xingdong was doubtful. Li Zi shot a glance at Zhou Wen and said, I believe that he suffered quite a psychological setback when he was first defeated by In Jing, causing people to mistake him for wallowing in self-misery. But that doesn't explain why he games in school. Tian Xingdong was still puzzled. Think about it. If everyone believes you to be trash and you end up scoring shockingly well on the college entrance exams, taking first place in the city, wouldn't it feel awesome to look back at the naysayers with a beaming look of success? Li Zi said. Holy shit, Zhou Wen has such nefarious thoughts. That scumbag, Tian Xingdong instantly came to a realization as he nearly exclaimed. Thankfully, Li Zi cupped his mouth in time. Zhou Wen obviously wasn't as Tian Xingdong imagined. Gaming similarly allowed him to grow stronger. Furthermore, the in-game character was equivalent to another him. When the in-game character was in combat, he would acquire the experience and skill familiarity from combat, therefore he had no need to train. Mutated Vigor Ant. Zhou Wen was grinding happily when he saw a blood-red Vigor Ant appear. Over the past few days, he had killed more than 10 mutated Vigor Ants, but the outcome wasn't anything desirable. Apart from the first mutated Vigor Ant dropping 2-dimensional crystals, the subsequent ones dropped dimensional crystals at a much lower rate. Their qualities were also worse. Ignoring the primordial energy skill crystal, even dimensional crystals with a value of 9 were rare. They didn't appear even after about 10 mutated Vigor Ants were killed. Now, Zhou Wen wasn't as excited as before when he saw mutated Vigor Ants. He very calmly controlled the blood-colored avatar to proceed forward and deliver 2 Vigor Divine Fist strikes to kill it. Ding! He heard a familiar chime. Something had dropped this time. Zhou Wen wasn't too excited. Even if a dimensional crystal dropped, it was useless even if it was valued at 7 or 8, unless they were speed crystals. They could only replenish his energy expenditure. However, when Zhou Wen identified the item that dropped, he was slightly taken aback. It was because the word crystal wasn't in the name of the item. Killed mutated Vigor Ant. Discovered companion egg. A game notice popped up at the bottom left of the screen. It left Zhou Wen surprised and delighted. Having a companion egg drop meant that he had a chance of possessing a companion beast. But based on what he knew, it was very rare for companion beasts to appear at the mortal stage. One could usually only have one after reaching the legendary stage. It could be said that companion beasts were a manifestation of one's strength and status. Humans that would take their companion beasts on the streets were basically experts at the legendary stage or higher. They were respected and envied by others. The reason people at the mortal stage lacked companion beasts was that mortal stage dimensional creatures almost never dropped companion beasts. Even legendary stage dimensional creatures had a relatively low probability of dropping one. Furthermore, legendary stage companion eggs required one to provide legendary stage primordial energy to incubate it. Therefore, even if mortal stage humans obtained a companion egg, they had no means to incubate it. Companion beasts that hatched after incubation would live and die with their masters. It was very difficult for them to be transferred. If a forceful transfer was made, an extremely huge price needed to be paid. The typical person had no way of achieving that. In a tiny city like Guide City, Zhou Wen had never seen a human at the mortal stage have a companion beast. The companion egg was about the size of the fist of the blood-colored avatar. It was completely milky white and translucent. It was oval in shape and inside some red lights were flickering. It looked mysterious and beautiful. Zhou Wen eagerly made the blood-colored avatar pick up the companion egg. The moment it made contact, Zhou Wen felt a jolt through his body. As though extracted by a needle, his primordial energy instantly flowed towards the phone. And in-game, the blood-colored avatar's primordial energy instantly went from 9 to 0.